In the final segment of the largemouth bass skin mount course, we're going to be putting our bass on a piece of driftwood. We're going to be using a piece of driftwood from Mackenzie Taxidermy Supply. This is an artificial piece of driftwood. These are artificial rocks. It's one piece. It comes molded that way from Mackenzie. It's really handy to have this. We could put the bass on it like this, the bass this way, but we're going to put it like this because we're going to have our bass chasing a lure, and we're going to be putting a few lily pads on it for our client. These are the lily pads we're going to be using. Again, we got these from Mackenzie Taxidermy Supply. On one of them, I extended it a little bit with a piece of wire, and you'll see why I did that later. This is the fishing lure we're going to be putting in front of our bass. This is just a rattling Rapala lure. We're going to be using an alligator hanger to hang our piece of driftwood on the wall. We're going to be using wire like this to attach to our lure that will go into these rocks right in front of the bass. And we have a couple of our reversible drivers with a couple of different bits in. We'll be pre-drilling some of our holes before we put our screws in. And we have our bass all back from the paint booth. It still has the paddle fixture on it that we used as a handle during the painting process. So the first step will be to remove that. Okay, we're just going to remove our painting fixture. Use our reversible driver. Take our screw off, and we'll just set this aside. Now you could remove this other wood block that we put on the outside of the bass if you wanted to. I'm going to keep it on. It's going to give the fish more of a three-dimensional effect after we screw it into our piece of driftwood, so it's not flat up against the wood. But that's 100% up to you. Also, from the painting course, if you had wanted to, you could have painted this back seam that we recreated the scales on. Might be good practice for you to do that. In this particular case, because the customer is not going to be seeing the back of the mount, we kept it black. First step in this process is to put our alligator hanger onto our piece of artificial driftwood and rock scene. You can get this from Mackenzie Taxidermy Supply, Headquarters Taxidermy Supply. Just about any taxidermy supplier will sell one of these alligator hangers. They're really heavy duty and they're great for this kind of work. We have to try to establish a center point on our piece so we know where to put our alligator hanger on the back. It's a little difficult to do that at this point because the bass has not been affixed to our piece of artificial driftwood. Right now, the heavier part is towards these artificial rocks here. But after we put our bass on, it'll even itself out. So to start, we're going to put it roughly here. A little bit towards the rocks, but still somewhat towards the center. To do that, I just lay it down on my workbench. Now, if you had a workbench that was dirty or it had other stuff stuck to it, you'd probably want to put some newspapers down or some kind of cushioning if you're going to put this directly on your bench. But I have a clean workbench here, so we're just going to put it straight down. Again, when you're setting this, you could put it here. Might be a little easier to hang. I'm going to hide it though behind the piece of driftwood. So I'm going to put it right here to get started. And again, we might have to move this after we put our bass on, but we want to start with something so we have a starting point. The first step is to pre-drill for our screws. Now we're using sheet metal screws for this. You can also use sheetrock screws, but whatever you use, you want to make sure it's long enough and it's heavy duty. We're going to be pre-drilling with a drill that's smaller than the threads on our sheet metal screws. If you would use one that is bigger or the same size, your threads aren't going to hold anything. And if you didn't pre-drill, the screws can go in a little hard. So I always like to pre-drill. We'll do one complete first, just to get it started. Okay. Look at it like that, make sure it's level. And we'll put our other two in. Obviously, you want to make sure that you don't use screws that are too long for this. You don't want to go through the show side of your driftwood. And the same token, you don't want to use screws that are too small. They won't hold anything. Okay. Okay, you can see where we're hanging right now. Obviously, we're way heavy towards these, which is fine because after we put our bass on, it should level itself out. That's what we want to see to start. The next step in the process is to get our bass attached to our piece of artificial driftwood. What I'm looking for is something similar to this. It's going to be chasing one of our fishing lures out here on the end of that rock. You just have to find a spot on the wood where the eye is not going to be hitting this other rock. I think we're going to be good right like this. You can see kind of what I'm doing here. It's kind of hard to see, but I'll show you in a second. So I have my rough area set where I want to put it. I'm just going to take a little piece of wire here and just mark where my holes are going to be. I'll be putting 2 holes in as my attachment point to get the bass attached onto this piece of wood. But I need to pre-drill before I do that. I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch drill. The reason I pre-drill through the artificial wood is I don't want the screws that I'm using to attach my bass to the wood to bind up as I'm putting them in. You want them just to go into the wood block on the back of the bass. You don't want any friction on your piece of artificial driftwood. For these excess chips. Again, with this particular piece, you could use a piece of real cedar driftwood for this, and you could make your own rocks, put your own rocks on, but you can get this from Mackenzie for around $50, and customers just love this stuff. If you're going to put mounts out the door, try to sell them on pieces like this. You'll make a lot more money. Again, we're going to be using our sheet metal screws for this. And I just like to take the screw and push it through to start. You can see I've got a lot of screw coming through. That's what's going to be going into my bass. So we're good there. If you didn't have these, you can use these longer sheetrock or deck screws. They work just as good. But you still want to pre-drill. That's what we're going to get the reversible driver hooked up and ready for now. Again, we have our 7/64 bit in. Going to take my bass and set it back on the artificial piece of wood and just try to line up where my first hole is going to be to get the angle I want. So I think I'm good right here. So I'm going to start by putting a hole in right there to pre-drill. Take one of my sheet metal screws, get that started in the piece of wood. Might be a little hard to see what I'm doing here, but it's pretty much self-explanatory. Just knock my drill down. I had it on a higher speed for doing some of the other drilling. I want to go in a little bit slower. Not worried about tightening it down super tight yet. Just snug it up. We're getting the bass adjusted. You can kind of see where we're coming down here. I wanted to be chasing a lure that's going to be right here. So I'm going to put just a touch more angle down on the bass, like that. We'll give it a test hang up to see where we're at. Starting to get into position. I'm going to step back a little bit and look at it from about 5 to 6 feet back to see if I have my angles correct. So we stood back now a few feet and took a look at it, made a few minor little adjustments. We didn't have to adjust too much. I'm very happy with how this is looking. We're going to be taking our lure, and it's going to be right here. We're taking a little bit of fishing line and tying that onto it and tying it up to that piece of wood. We'll also be putting in at least one lily pad right here. We might put another one in back here too. We'll see how that looks, but at least we're going to put one in here. So now that we have the bass basically set where we wanted, we can go ahead and put in our last screw to permanently affix it to the piece of wood. I'm going to take my smaller drill again and pre-drill. Take another one of my sheet metal screws. Kind of support the bass while I'm doing this. I'll tighten up my first screw a little bit more. And we are good to go. We'll just hang it up one more time to double check. You can kind of play around with the angle on the driftwood too on the wall. I'm going to kind of have it somewhere right like this. I think it looks kind of nice. So the next step is we need to put our lily pad in place. And like I said, we're at least going to put one in. The easiest spot to hide this is going to be right behind this little piece of driftwood up here. Right about here. The first step to setting our lily pad in place is to pre-drill using one of our larger drill bits. We want to make sure that it's bigger than the stem on the lily pad. And we'll carefully take our bass and driftwood piece off the wall. I'm going to drill in right behind this little piece of wood because it's going to hide it. There's a little area right here that's going to go in very easily. Don't have to go in too far for this. Just going to rock that drill bit around a little bit, open that hole up. Tap off that extra wood. You do a test fit and it fits in there really nicely. Take a look at it like that. It looks good. You can see kind of where we're at. Now, again, at this point, you can hot glue this in so it doesn't come out. I have it pushed in to the point where it's not really going to come out. And for transportation reasons with my client, I'm probably going to remove it while we load it into his vehicle. So we're going to keep it like this. Detachable. Okay, now I'm just checking to make sure that my lily pad's not hitting back on the wall. And it looks natural, and I think we've got it pretty good. You want to stand back about 3 to 4 feet just to check that. I'm going to do that right now myself. Yeah, that looks nice. I do have another lily pad. I could put this set right back here. That might look kind of nice. As you can see, this particular lily pad doesn't have a very long stem on it. So I extended it with a piece of wire. If I put it back here behind the soft dorsal, you're not going to see the wire. And that's probably what I'm going to do. If it was a situation where you could see the wire, I would just take some of our epoxy sculpt and epoxy this whole area and then paint it to blend with this stem. But in this particular case, I'm going to leave it with just the wire. So I'm going to grab a smaller diameter drill for this because the wire that I have coming out of the bottom of this particular lily pad is quite small. I wouldn't want to use that bigger drill like I used in the first lily pad. Again, we're just going to put a hole here behind the soft dorsal and we're putting it right into the driftwood. I'm just rocking that around a little bit. Blow off that excess wood and make sure that our wire does go in. You see, we're going to have to cut the wire down already, but we'll do that after we have it on the wall. So we had a rough position set up for our bass like this. You can see that, you can see a little bit of the wire, and I think I need to just drop my lily pad a little bit. So I'm just going to grab my nippers and nip that off. We just nipped a little bit of that excess wire off. And we're going to put it back in our hole again just to test it out. See kind of where we're at with it. Okay, now again, I'm going to stand back a little bit, just take a look at it. Okay, we're at the final step now before we call our customer to pick up the bass. We have to attach the lure he caught the bass with in front of it. As we talked about before, we're going to be putting it right in front like it's about ready to grab it. If you have a mount like this where the mouth is open and you're going to be doing some kind of a habitat scene with it, it's a good idea to have something that you can put in front of its mouth to make it look like it's about ready to grab something, whether that's a bait fish, a crawfish, a frog, or any kind of a fishing lure like this. It makes the mount look a little bit more natural. Our client does not want this to be necessarily permanently put into our scene. In other words, he might want to use this lure again someday. So we're not going to be using epoxy or apoxy to attach our lure. We're just going to be using hot glue and this wire. First thing we need to do is, again, double check which way it's facing. It's facing to the right. So we'll be making a hole in the left side of our lure. Again, we're using a diameter bit that's just a little bit bigger than our piece of wire to do this. This can be a little dangerous. You don't want this thing to spin around and hook you, so hold it really tight when you're putting your hole in. Okay, we have our hole drilled in. The next step is to take a little bit of hot glue, and we're just going to put a gob of it right on the back and then push our wire through that and into the fish. We're also going to be forcing a little bit of our hot glue into the fishing lure. Okay, and we'll just push our wire in and we'll let that cure out. So after the hot glue is cured out on our lure, what I did is I drilled a hole into the rock and then I put a little hot glue in that hole and just pushed the lure in place. And I have it in this particular position right here. And after the hot glue is set up, our last step is to attach our fishing line. This is 8-pound test fishing line. This is what the customer used to catch the bass on. Do a couple of half knots, all you need for this. You know, we're going to run it up behind our driftwood piece. Right here is where it's kind of hidden. To attach our fishing line behind our piece of driftwood, I'm just going to wrap it around my lily pad a few times. And push that lily pad back in place. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess fishing line. Double check our angles. And now we're going to go ahead and step back, take a look at it, and see if we have it finished. Yeah, it looks good. We have it ready to go. Now we can call our client and have him come pick it up. I want to thank you again for watching the Largemouth Bass Skin Mount course. If you have any questions, be sure to jump onto our forum and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Now that you've completed this course, it might also be a good time to check out some of the other courses we have on Taxidermy Insider. Thanks again for watching and good luck.